For nearly a quarter of a century, from 1792 all the way to 1815, Europe was just constantly at war. These were conflicts on a scale nobody had ever seen before, and they completely reshaped the continent. And the central question through it all is, how did one country, France, end up fighting pretty much everyone over and over and over again?
Well, if you really want to get a handle on this whole chaotic period, it all boils down to one simple number: 7. That's how many times the great powers of Europe banded together into these massive alliances called coalitions for one single goal: to defeat France.
So you gotta ask, right? Why? What was so threatening about France that it took 7 massive wars to deal with it? Was this really a continent-wide crusade against the French Revolution and its dangerous new ideas? Or was it all just a desperate struggle to contain the limitless ambition of one man, Napoleon Bonaparte?
Yep, this whole era is defined by these 7 distinct conflicts, what we call the coalition wars.
So what exactly is a coalition? It's pretty simple, really. It's just a temporary team-up. A bunch of kingdoms and empires, sometimes rivals themselves, getting together for one single purpose: taking down their common enemy, which in this case was France.
And when you look at this timeline, you can see there was hardly a moment of peace. It's like as soon as one war ended, another one was already gearing up. To make sense of it all, we can actually break this entire 23-year saga down into 3 distinct acts.
So let's start with Act 1. And you might be surprised to hear our story doesn't begin with a powerful empire. Nope, it starts with a brand new, fragile French Republic fighting for its very survival against the old monarchies of Europe.
I mean, just look at this. The lineup for that first coalition is, well, it's pretty staggering. You've got Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain. Basically a who's who of European royalty all ganging up on the lone French Republic. The odds were just insane.
And yet, and this is the incredible part, France didn't just hold on, it won. Its armies, completely transformed by the revolution, didn't just push back the invaders, they went on the attack. And by 1797, France was actually expanding its borders. And it's right here, in the Italian campaign, that a young, ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte first burst onto the scene with a string of dazzling victories.
So one by one, all these other countries made peace and went home. All except one: Great Britain. They were left alone to keep the fight going. And trust me, this is a theme you're going to see again and again.
But of course, the peace didn't hold. France, now feeling pretty confident, started to become the aggressor. They were making moves, invading Switzerland, occupying Rome, even launching this wild expedition to Egypt. These provocations were just too much for the other powers, and it pulled them right back in for a second coalition.
At first, things were looking pretty bad for France, but then you get this massive plot twist. Napoleon ditches his army in Egypt, rushes back to Paris, seizes total political power in a coup, and then, boom, leads his army to this incredible, decisive victory at Marengo. Just like that, France was back on top in Italy.
With everyone else either beaten or just plain tired of fighting, France signs the Peace of Amiens, and for the first time in a decade, Europe was quiet. But, well, everyone kind of knew this was more of a timeout than a true, lasting peace.
And that brings us to Act 2. The whole nature of the conflict is about to shift. This isn't about the revolution's survival anymore. Oh no. This is all about the ambition of one man, Emperor Napoleon. And during this period, you start to see a very clear pattern emerge. It goes like this. A new coalition forms, usually bankrolled by a whole lot of British cash. Napoleon marches out his incredible grand army, wins a stunning victory, and then imposes a brutal peace treaty that completely redraws the map of Europe. Rinse and repeat.
The third coalition is the perfect example of this pattern. In 1805, Russia and Austria team up with Britain. Napoleon's response? Lightning fast. He absolutely smashes their combined armies at Austerlitz, what many consider his greatest victory. And the result? The Holy Roman Empire, an institution that had existed for 1,000 years, was just gone, dissolved, forever.
Okay, so next up is Prussia in 1806. They were super confident in their army, which had this legendary reputation. They decided to take on Napoleon. Big mistake, huge. In a single day, at the twin battles of Jena and Austerlitz, the entire Prussian military was basically wiped off the map. The peace treaty that followed literally dismembered their kingdom.
And here we go again in 1809. This time, it's Austria. They see Napoleon's tied up with a nasty guerrilla war in Spain and think, hey,
Maybe now's our chance. The result? You guessed it, a really tough fight, but another French victory at Wagram and another humiliating treaty that carved off even more Austrian land.
So at this point, Napoleon is at the absolute peak of his power. He controls most of the continent. But one colossal, fatal blunder is about to trigger our final act and bring this whole imperial house of cards crashing down. And that turning point? The disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. Napoleon's Grand Army, the greatest military force in Europe, was utterly destroyed, not so much by the Russian army, but by the endless space and the brutal Russian winter. This massive failure was the signal everyone had been waiting for. It proved Napoleon could be beaten.
This disaster gave birth to the massive Sixth Coalition, leading to the epic showdown at Leipzig in 1813. They call it the Battle of the Nations for a reason. Napoleon, with a new, inexperienced army, was facing a combined force almost twice his size. The odds were just too great. He was defeated, and his German allies literally switched sides in the middle of the battle.
After Leipzig, the end came fast. The coalition armies poured into France. Paris itself fell. With absolutely no hope left, Napoleon had to abdicate. The Treaty of Paris was signed, and just like that, France was pushed back to the borders it had way back in 1792. But wait, because this story has one more absolutely unbelievable chapter. In 1815, Napoleon escapes from his island exile on Elba. He lands in France, and the whole country just rallies to him for one last desperate roll of the dice. And in response, Europe instantly snaps together the seventh and final coalition to shut him down for good. And that last gamble met its end on the muddy fields of Waterloo. On June 18, 1815, the combined might of the British and Prussian armies dealt Napoleon his final crushing defeat. This brought the 100 Days adventure and the entire Napoleonic era to a dramatic and definitive end. So after all that, after 23 years of nearly non-stop war, millions dead, what was it all for? What was the result? Well, a brand new map and a new order for Europe. They signed a second Treaty of Paris, and this one was even tougher on France. They were punished for taking Napoleon back, losing territory like Savoy and Nice that they'd held since the early days of the Revolution. The victors got together and redrew the map of the continent, trying to create a balance of power that they hoped would stop a war like this from ever happening again. Which really leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? When you look back at all of it, 7 coalitions, decades of war, millions of lives lost, what was the ultimate point? Was this a necessary fight to stop an unstoppable tyrant from conquering the world? Or was it a massive overreaction by the old monarchies? A crusade to crush the dangerous new ideas of liberty and equality that the French Revolution had unleashed? That's something historians are still debating today.